June 19th, 1944. Rail siding outside Camp Ruston, Louisiana. The train squeals as its brakes bite into the humid southern air, metal grinding on metal, a long, aching scream that vibrates through the wooden cattle cars. Inside, 60 German prisoners sway with the sudden lurch, hands gripping rough planks, the air thick with sweat, sawdust, and the faint, stale smell of coal smoke that has seeped into their uniforms over days of travel. Obergefreiter Hans Keller feels the jolt in his knees. The black stenciled letters on the inside of the car, U.S. Army Transport, shudder in his field of vision. He has not seen open sky since they rolled out of the New York harbor yards, past cranes and warehouses so large they made Hamburg feel like a village. Now, through the slats, he sees green, endless, suffocating green. Pine trees, low brush, a red dirt road cut into the landscape like a fresh wound. And heat that presses against his face even through the gaps in the boards, heavy and wet, so different from the dry blast of North Africa where he was captured. "Endlich," someone mutters behind him. "At least we've stopped." A fist bangs on the outside of the car. A voice, American, rough and impatient, shouts, "All right, Krauts, listen up. You move when we tell you to move." The sliding door jerks. For a second it fights against the swollen wood, then gives way with a crack, flooding the interior with blinding white light. You can almost feel what Hans feels, the sudden sting in his eyes, the way everyone squints and raises hands as if under fire. Hans blinks and sees them. American guards in khaki uniforms, helmets slung low, rifles held casual but ready. MPs with white bands on their sleeves. A line of trucks and canvas-covered vehicles breathing diesel fumes into the hot air. And then he sees something that stops his thoughts mid-step. On the siding, near a stack of crates, stand two soldiers. One is white, tall and broad-shouldered, stripes of a sergeant on his sleeve. The other is black, in the same khaki uniform, same boots, same webbing, a pistol on his hip. They are talking, not like master and servant, not like officer and men, but like colleagues. The black soldier gestures at a clipboard, jabs a finger at a column of numbers, and the white sergeant nods, listening. Hans frowns. That doesn't fit. In the Reich, they had been told many things about America, that it was chaotic, weak, ruled by Jews and money, that its Neger were at the bottom of everything, barely human, laughed at, pushed aside. The propaganda posters showed cartoonish images, wide red lips, clumsy bodies, always in chains, always beneath the white man's boot. But now, on this dusty siding in Louisiana, the black soldier closes the clipboard with a snap and calls over his shoulder to another group of Americans unloading crates. His voice carries authority. Men move when he speaks. One white private grins, makes a joke Hans can't quite catch, and the black soldier laughs, shaking his head as he writes something down. The guard at the door shouts again, "Let's go, move it!" The Germans spill out of the car in a stumbling line, boots hitting the wooden platform, then sinking slightly into the red dirt. The heat hits them like a physical blow. Sweat springs out instantly on Hans' back under his faded Feldgrau tunic. A corporal beside him swears softly in Swabian dialect. "Eyes front," an American MP barks. But Hans can't help it. His gaze flicks back to the two soldiers. The black American now stands by one of the trucks, talking to a white lieutenant with a map folded under his arm. The lieutenant points to the camp gates in the distance, barbed wire glinting in the sun. The black soldier nods once, crisply. They speak as if the opinion of the man with dark skin matters. Hans' jaw tightens. It must be a trick, he tells himself, a show, put on for their benefit. The Americans know that German prisoners are arriving. They know what Nazis think about race. Perhaps this is some kind of theater. He tries to imagine the propaganda ministry back in Berlin staging something similar. A Jew and an Aryan officer standing side by side, equal in rank and purpose. The image is so absurd he almost laughs. "Row of 4, schnell, schnell," another guard orders, clapping his hands sharply. The column forms, mess tins clanking against belts, a ragged line of sunburned faces and hollow eyes. Helmets are long gone, replaced by caps or bare heads. Some still have the Afrika Korps palm tree on their sleeves. Others wear patched field jackets that once marched through France and Russia. As they step off towards the camp gates, Hans hears the rhythmic clatter of industry in the distance, hammering, faint engine noise, a saw whining through lumber. Beyond the wire, beyond the forest, America is working. Even here, miles from any city, the sound of production hangs in the air like a promise or a threat. They march past another group of Americans standing by a water truck. One of them, a black private with rolled-up sleeves and forearms slick with sweat, leans against the fender, smoking. A white soldier in the same unit offers him a canteen, and they share it casually, passing it back and forth without a second thought. Hans feels a prickling at the back of his neck. It's not that he has never seen black men before. North Africa was full of colonial troops. French units with Senegalese and Moroccan soldiers, British forces with Indians, South Africans. But here, something is different. One of the POWs behind him, a thin Oberlieutenant named Weber, forces a sneer into his voice. "Look at that, Keller. They let the Negroes wear uniforms now. Degenerate society." Hans opens his mouth to agree automatically, to say something about the decay of the West, about how the Führer had warned them. Instead, the words stick. Because what he just saw wasn't decay. It was function. Those units moved like a machine. Orders given, orders followed. Nobody flinched when the black soldier spoke. Nobody rolled their eyes or laughed behind his back. Weber notices his silence. "You see," the officer adds, trying to reassert control over the moment. "This is why we will win. They mix races like animals." Hans glances up at the guard towers being built at the edge of the camp, the wooden beams, the rolls of fresh barbed wire uncoiled by yet another work detail of Americans, black and white, together, hauling the same heavy spools. We will win. Under this sun, under this noise, under the shadow of those towers, the words sound thin. He realizes with a small, unwelcome twist in his chest that for the first time since he donned the uniform of the Wehrmacht, he is not entirely sure. The line turns toward the open camp gate, where a black American sergeant stands with a clipboard, ticking off the arriving prisoners as a white lieutenant watches. The sergeant calls out a question. The lieutenant answers briefly, then steps aside to let him continue his work. Hans can't stop staring.
June fades into July. The Louisiana heat does not fade with it. Inside Camp Ruston, the days fall into rhythm. Roll call, breakfast, work detail, evening count. For Hans Keller and the other German POWs, routine becomes survival. Each morning, a truck rattles through the camp gates, dust curling in its wake, ready to haul prisoners to the local sawmill or the cotton fields. The guards, mostly older reservists or soldiers recovering from injuries, call out names in English, slow and deliberate, as if daring the Germans to misunderstand. The camp smells of pine, diesel, and the faint sweetness of cornbread that drifts from the mess hall each evening. Crickets hum in the trees, floodlights flicker on at dusk, and beyond the fence, just beyond, America hums like a colossal engine that never sleeps. Hans is assigned to a labor detail at a nearby lumber yard. The first morning, he climbs onto the back of the truck with 20 other prisoners, flanked by 2 American guards. One of them is young, maybe 20, his face freckled, his helmet pushed back lazily. The other is older, a black sergeant with a calm voice and the kind of posture that says he's used to being obeyed. "Name's Sergeant Daniels," the man says as the truck jolts forward. "You boys behave, we got no problems." The younger guard smirks. "Ain't that right, Sarge?" Daniels doesn't answer. He's watching the road, his hand resting lightly on his rifle. Hans studies him from across the truck bed. The man's uniform is spotless, the brass on his belt polished to a dull shine. Sweat trickles down his temple, but his expression never changes. His eyes flick over the prisoners, assessing, calm, unreadable. One of the POWs, a man named Meisner, mutters under his breath, "A Negro with stripes. What next? A woman general?" Hans almost smiles, not at the joke, but how quickly Meisner needs to fill silence with mockery. It's what they all do now. Laugh, sneer, invent superiority to hide confusion. When the truck reaches the lumber yard, the prisoners dismount under the watch of civilian supervisors, some white, some black. The foreman, a heavy-set man in overalls, waves his clipboard. "All right, you fellas, stack the boards from that pile to the flatbed. Don't drop none. That's U.S. Army property now." Daniel stands nearby, supervising without barking. When one prisoner struggles with a load, he steps forward, helps him lift it, and then returns to his post without a word. By noon, shirts are drenched, hands blistered. Daniels calls for a water break. The Americans share canteens, passing them back and forth. No hesitation, no visible barrier. The German prisoners watch. Weber whispers to Hans, "Discipline's gone. Look at them, no pride, no order, a mixed rabble." Hans doesn't answer, because when he looks closer, what he sees is the opposite of chaos. The Americans move with practiced ease. The white and black workers joke, argue, then laugh. The system works, not because one dominates the other, but because they trust each other to get the job done. It unsettles him more than gunfire ever did. That night, back inside the camp, Hans sits on his bunk staring at the tin ceiling. The barracks are loud, men arguing, singing, someone carving a chess piece out of scrap wood. But his mind is elsewhere. He remembers Berlin, 1938, the torchlight parades, the slogans painted across buildings, Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer. He remembers the faces in the propaganda films, the measured cadence of Goebbels' speeches, the promise that they were the master race destined to rule. Yet here, on the other side of the ocean, in a place they were told was decadent and corrupt, he's seen something that makes the entire ideology wobble. A black sergeant commanding white guards, a factory where men of all colors work side by side, a military that, even in segregation, functions through shared purpose rather than fear. The thought is dangerous, but it won't go away. Days turn into weeks. One morning, rain comes down in sheets, soaking the camp. The work detail is delayed. The POWs wait under the eaves of the barracks, watching mud slide between the fence posts. Then a truck pulls up. Daniel steps out, rain dripping from his helmet. He waves at the prisoners. "Come on, let's move. We still got orders to fill." They groan, climb on board. At the yard, the Americans are already working, hauling tarps, unloading supplies. The black and white workers shout over the rain, coordinating like an orchestra. Daniels grabs a shovel and joins them. Hans watches as the sergeant, the same man who guards him with a rifle, bends shoulder to shoulder with his fellow soldiers, covered in mud, laughing at something one of them says. No stage, no pretense, just men doing their job. For the first time, Hans feels something strange. Respect. When Daniels notices his stare, he nods once, neither friendly nor hostile. Just a nod between men who understand labor and order. Hans nods back before he can stop himself. Weber catches the gesture. Careful, Keller. You're starting to look impressed. Hans shrugs. Maybe I am. Weber scoffs. They're animals with uniforms. Hans looks at him quietly. Then maybe animals build better than we do. Weber glares, but says nothing. Outside the fence, thunder rolls. Inside, something far more powerful is shifting, the slow erosion of belief. Hans doesn't realize it yet, but the camp has begun to do something no battlefield could: dismantle the ideology that sent him there.
August 3rd, 1944. The Louisiana air is thick with the smell of oil and hot steel. Hans Keller wipes sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand as the truck bounces along a gravel road toward a new assignment. The guard in the passenger seat, Sergeant Daniels again, checks the clipboard on his knee. "Today, you'll help load crates at the Shreveport Motor Works," he says. "Army contracts. Keep your hands where we can see 'em, follow instructions, and we'll get along fine." The truck rattles through the gates of a vast industrial complex. The noise hits first, hammers on metal, engines rumbling, the rhythmic hiss of welding torches. Then the sight. Endless rows of factory buildings, smokestacks painting the sky with a steady gray plume. Hans stares. He's worked in machine shops before, back in Bavaria before the war, but nothing like this. The scale is beyond comprehension. Inside the main hangar, conveyor belts stretch as far as he can see, rolling out engines, axles, and gears with the precision of a military parade. And everywhere, people, hundreds of them, men and women, young and old, black and white, moving in coordinated rhythm. The clang of tools and the whir of belts merge into a single relentless heartbeat. An American foreman in a blue jumpsuit approaches the truck. "Morning, Sergeant. These the new hands?" "Yeah, straight from Ruston." "Good. Put 'em on crate detail." The foreman gestures toward a line of forklifts. "We got 50 truck engines headed for New Orleans before sundown." The POWs are herded toward the loading bay. Hans grabs a pair of heavy gloves and falls into line, stacking engines onto pallets. A woman in coveralls, maybe 20, with grease streaked across her cheek, operates the lift beside him. She grins as she maneuvers the machine, shouting over the roar of the engine. "Careful there, fella. That one's 40 pounds heavier than it looks." Hans nods, not sure if he's allowed to answer. She doesn't seem to care. She shifts the lever, and the engine rises smoothly onto the truck bed. At the next station, a black mechanic in goggles tightens bolts with swift, practiced motions. His tools click in precise rhythm. 1, 2, 3, then the satisfying clang of metal on metal. He hums softly under his breath, a tune Hans doesn't recognize. A white supervisor leans over to inspect his work, claps him on the shoulder, and says something that makes them both laugh. The sound doesn't match anything Hans has been told about America. He watches as the line of workers moves seamlessly, like gears in a massive clock. No overseers with whips, no shouting. Orders are given, but with respect. Mistakes are corrected, but with patience. Daniels walks past the German detail, checking progress. "Keep it steady. We ship out at 1400. Hans can't help himself. "Sergeant," he asks in halting English, "these men, they work together, always." Daniels raises an eyebrow. "Sure do. Why?" Hans hesitates. "In Germany, it would not be allowed." Daniels lets out a short breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Yeah, I know how your country runs things. Ain't perfect here either. But when there's a war to win, we don't got time to argue over skin color. You can't build a tank with hate." Hans looks at the floor, unsure what to say. At lunchtime, the prisoners sit on the edge of the loading dock, eating from tin pails the Americans provided. Across the yard, workers crowd around tables, chatting between bites of sandwiches. There's laughter, music from a portable radio, and someone passing around a bottle of Coca-Cola. A black worker walks over, holding 2 extra bottles. He glances at Daniels, who nods. "Go on, they ain't going to bite." The man hands the bottles to Hans and Meinsner. "Hot day," he says simply, then walks back to his group. Meinsner glares at the drink like it's poison. "You're not actually going to." But Hans is all ready. The fizz bites his tongue, cold and sweet. He can't remember the last time he tasted something so trivial, so human. When he looks up, the worker is laughing at something one of his friends said, sunlight glinting off his bottle. Not a servant, not a caricature, just a man on his lunch break. By mid-afternoon, the shipment is complete. Daniels signs off the paperwork and waves the prisoners back toward the truck. As they drive out, Hans looks one last time through the slats. He sees the workers, men and women of every shade, waving as the trucks roll past. Their laughter carries over the noise of machinery. The flags hanging above the factory doors ripple in the warm wind. 13 stripes, 50 stars. The symbol of a country that, for all its contradictions, functions through unity. In that moment, Hans feels something unexpected. Not fear, not envy, but admiration, tinged with confusion. He remembers the posters that called Americans decadent, the speeches that promised the 1,000-year Reich. Yet here he is, surrounded by people who build faster, fight harder, and somehow, despite their differences, keep moving forward. As the camp gates close behind the truck, Hans leans back against the wooden side panel. For the first time since donning the uniform, he begins to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the Reich was wrong about what makes a nation strong.
September 1944. The nights are cooler now, and Camp Rustin hums with a subdued rhythm. The days of shock and disbelief have faded into a quieter kind of tension, one that lives not in barbed wire or rifles, but in the minds of men who have begun to think too much. Inside Barracks 14B, the smell of damp wood mixes with tobacco smoke. A small kerosene lamp flickers on a crate that serves as a table. Around it sit half a dozen German prisoners, their faces half lit, half shadow. Oberlieutenant Weber leans forward, his tone sharp. "It's all propaganda," he insists, voice echoing softly off the planks. "They parade their Negroes in front of us to make America look civilized. You really think they treat them as equals?" Meisner nods in agreement. "Of course not. They'd never let one of them command white men in Germany. It's all for show." Hans sits a little apart from the group, polishing his mess tin. The rhythmic scrape of cloth on metal fills the silence between words. He looks up slowly. "I've seen Sergeant Daniels. He doesn't act for anyone. When he gives an order, the Americans obey. They respect him." Weber's lip curls. Respect born of fear, perhaps. Hans shakes his head. "No. Respect born of trust." The officer stares at him, eyes narrowing. "Careful, Keller. You sound like one of them." Hans doesn't flinch. "Maybe I'm tired of sounding like what we were told to be." The others shift uneasily. The lamp flame wavers. For a moment, no one speaks. Then Meisner breaks the silence. "You've gone soft, Keller. Don't forget, they bomb our cities. They kill our families." Hans looks at him evenly. "And still they feed us. They give us doctors, books, even instruments for music. If we had won, would we have done the same for them?" No one answers. Outside, the guard tower light sweeps across the compound. Crickets chirp in the grass. Somewhere far off, a train whistle blows.
long, mournful, the sound of a country that never sleeps. Weeks pass. The war in Europe turns. Rumors trickle through the camp. Paris liberated. Allied forces crossing into Germany. Some POWs cheer secretly at night, not for victory, but for an end. Others cling harder to the idea that the Reich will rise again, even as reality crumbles. Hans spends more and more time on work detail, volunteering for shifts. The Americans seem to appreciate his efficiency. Daniels occasionally talks with him now. Short exchanges, but real conversation. One afternoon, as they unload crates of timber, Daniels gestures toward the distant tree line. "You from the city?" "Munich. Before the war, I built furniture. My father taught me the trade." Daniels nods, setting a crate down. "Carpentry's good work. My dad was a blacksmith. Used to say a man's worth is in what he builds, not what he destroys." Hans studies him for a moment, then asks quietly, "And here, are you treated the same as the white soldiers?" Daniels chuckles. "Not always. Some folks still think the color of your skin decides what kind of man you are. But I'll tell you something, Keller. When you're under fire, no one gives a damn what shade you are. You just pray the man next to you can shoot straight." Hans nods slowly. It's a truth so simple, it cuts through years of propaganda like a clean saw through wood. That night, back in the barracks, Hans takes out a small notebook. The Red Cross had distributed them weeks earlier for writing letters home. Most men use them to scribble poems, sketches, or plans for the day they'd be free. Hans writes something different. "We were told they were weak, that their society was poisoned by equality. But here I see strength built on difference. Factories run by men who look nothing alike. Soldiers who follow a man not because of his skin, but because he earns their respect. I think now perhaps we were afraid, not of their weakness, but of their strength." He closes the notebook quietly. The barracks are silent except for the soft breathing of sleeping men. Outside, beyond the wire, he hears the faint rumble of distant thunder, or maybe artillery practice, and the rustle of the pine trees swaying in the night wind. For the first time since the war began, Hans feels something like peace. Not surrender, not shame, just clarity. He understands now that the war he fought wasn't just about borders or armies. It was about belief, the idea that one kind of man was born to rule over another. And in this place, of all places, he's seen that lie unravel. Weeks later, news reaches the camp. Germany has surrendered. The war is over. Some men cheer, some cry, some sit in stunned silence. Hans just exhales. He looks around at the camp, at the black sergeant who once guarded him, at the white guards who joked with him, at the workers who shared their water, their food, their humanity. For them, the war was already over because they were never fighting each other. Hans realizes that the strongest nation is not the one that conquers others. It's the one that conquers its own hate.